Every day we make choices, some small, some life-changing. But what if the real challenge isn't simply choosing, but learning to choose well, with reflection, accountability, and spiritual growth in mind? Welcome to We Have a Spiritual Problem, a podcast where we confront the deeper questions beneath our personal struggles and collective crises. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong. I am not a theologian or a philosopher, or at least by training. I am a PhD exercise physiologist with an interest in the intersection of the physical and the spiritual. My guest is Lauryn Axelrod, and together we explore free will, conscious decision-making, and the cycles of accountability, forgiveness, and transformation that shape our lives. This conversation examines how questioning our beliefs, reflecting on our choices, and embracing forgiveness can lead to spiritual evolution and personal growth in a world full of false binaries. Lauryn Axelrod, it is a pleasure to have you back on the We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast. You've been on, I think this is your fourth episode now with this one, not counting your episode on the Aging Well podcast. So it's always a pleasure to have you kind of back on here. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, and have we solved any spiritual problems since the last episode you've been on?
No. Have we solved any of our problems? Well, first of all, let me just back up. I've been busy. I've been writing. I took a little bit of a sabbatical because even spiritual teachers need to take a break sometimes at the end of August, which was wonderful. And it just brought me back into this season, which is it's fall or almost fall by the equinox. And it's a time of deep self-reflection in many traditions. It's tied into, in the Taoist 5 elements theory, it's tied into metal, which is the season. Metal is knives and scythes and saws. It's the cutting away of the things that aren't working, or have died. In the Jewish tradition, it's the period leading up into the high holidays, especially Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So it's a period of deep self-reflection and introspection. And where have we gone wrong? What have we done? What have we done that didn't work so well? And it's also leading into sort of more Christian traditions, going into Day of the Dead and All Saints Day, things like that are actually also reflections on her. So it's a potent season. Have we solved any problems? Dang, I wish I could say we had. I really do. I'm not sure. I think we're actually deeper in it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that tension is just continuing to build. But as I think we talked about in some of the previous conversations, I'm still very optimistic. I'm kind of leaning into hard, and the idea of the mega point and how we are spiritually evolving towards something better. And we need that tension, that friction in order to grow. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like we need a lot more tension to kind of get that next big push. But I think, just like my geology years, when that tension builds up to the greatest amount on a fault line, and when it releases, it might cause some damage in the process, but there's a great transformation that comes with that. And so I think that's kind of where we're at.
Absolutely. I agree. And, things might get worse before they get better, but we certainly need that pressure. It's a question of inertia, right? Mm-hmm. We got comfortable, we got really comfortable, and now it's starting to push and squeeze. And this is the time when we have to be even more vigilant in our spiritual practice, because when the pressure's on, if we haven't done our work, it's gonna get ugly. But at the same time, we need that tension. We need that pressure in order to transform. Nothing changes on its own. It requires some kind of force to make it transform. And this is, going back again to what's potent in this season of transformation. It is, the leaves are are transforming, the plants are transforming, nature's transforming. We're going from, that period of lushness from summer to this period of, leaves falling and going into hibernation in preparation for winter. So it is designed for exactly this kind of experience, you know? And in the Jewish tradition, the word for this transformation is teshuvah, right? To turn. It literally is what it means to turn. To turn from that direction to this direction, right? Or that direction that wasn't working to a direction that might work better.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and I can't remember the author of the book, but the book, The Fourth Turning. And if you're familiar with that, and talking about kind of those seasons and cycles of life and history, where we go from these periods where we're really just everything is good to cycling to ultimately to crisis, which is where we're kind of at now. Which in his latest book, he says the fourth turning is here. And then you think of the seasons, and like you said, every religious tradition works in cycles. I can't think of a single one that doesn't have some kind of cyclical pattern to it. And even in the more mystical Christian traditions have much more ritual that goes along with the cycles of life. And so do you think it's essential for our spiritual growth to almost have those seasons? I mean, we were talking before we started recording that, how much, you, when you lived in California, missed the four seasons. Me living in Oregon, where there's really only two seasons, spring and summer, I missed the four seasons of where I grew up in Pennsylvania. And do you think that that's almost kind of an essential to us for our spiritual development?
Absolutely. We have to go through these cycles, and we have to go through cycles of change. I mean, nothing stays the same. And it's our adjustment to our adaptation to these cycles and to these changes that offers us the opportunity for spiritual growth. I mean, everything happens in cycles, everything. And, if we look at our religious traditions, most of them were based on agricultural traditions and observations of nature. So they're like, yeah, everything changes. We go through cycles. We have, and that got mythologized in, stories of like, Persephone having to go to the underworld and that being the winter season, or in the ancient Near East, it's the summer. Right. So the month of Tammuz is named after a Babylonian god that had the same story, the same mythological story. Like, we have to go down in order to come up. Right. We have to go through these changes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what would you like to talk about today? What's really heavy on your mind as we think about the spiritual problems we have in this world?
Well, to tie into that idea of we're in these cycles, we're in this cycle right now where what isn't working is falling away, sometimes not easily, right? It's and that we have an opportunity to turn, to make different choices. So, we've talked a lot about like the don't touch the apple thing, right? So like we have been endowed with the ability to make choices. We've been endowed with free will. And, as it says at a certain point in the Torah, for example, when just before the Israelites are to enter the land, they're getting, 39 days of lectures from Moses. And it's like the longest graduation speech ever. But at one point he says, or actually I think it's God that says, I have put before you a blessing and a curse. Which will you choose? I put before you life and death, and God says choose life. But the idea here is that you always have a choice between the blessing and the curse. And that is our blessing and our curse too, that we can make choices. We can decide, and in the story of Adam and Eve, like, they make a choice. And because of their choice, here are the consequences, So I think where we are right now, I'm thinking a lot, and also, tying it into the season, I'm thinking a lot about choices. What are the choices that we're making both individually and collectively? Because this is a period where we have to look at both. What choices are we making as a culture, as a society, as a nation, as a family? And what choices are we making individually in our own lives that might be feeding into this chaos and feeding into these problems that we're having?
Do you think part of the problem that we have in our society is that we don't have a problem looking at what choices are made, but we generally look at what choices others are making rather than the choices that we are making.
Right. And we also have a problem of accountability, right? Is that in the sense that we might make a bad choice, but oh no, it wasn't my fault. Right. We don't take accountability. We don't take responsibility for the choices that we make. And I think that's a huge place to start. Again, I'm going to go back to my own tradition where we have a particular set of prayers in the liturgy that started on Saturday and leads us up into the high holidays. And it is a confessional, right? It's called the Ashamnu or Vdui. There are several names for it, but it's for and I'm going to use the language, right? Don't get triggered by the word, but, for the sin that I have sinned against you by, and it's a it's a litany. It's a litany. It goes on for, a long time. And the whole point is, I'm taking ownership. I am taking responsibility for where I've gone, where I've done the wrong thing, where I didn't do what I could. It's a sin of omission, a sin of commission, right? Things I did, things I didn't do, all of that. But it's taking that responsibility. And, there's a gesture where, with each one, there's a knock on the chest. It's pretty dramatic. It's like seriously and it's done communally. So it's that individually I've done it, but collectively we have also. Where can we take responsibility for how we have contributed to this mess?
And I am a Christian. I prefer to just call myself more of a follower of Christ. Because I don't necessarily believe in every one of the kind of Christian traditions and some of the holidays. In fact, I come from a bit of a tradition where I spent some time in my Christian faith where I was more of a Sabbatarian. I still miss that and miss the cycles of the 7 high holy days and the lessons that gives us. But in much of the Christian tradition, particularly the more modern Christian tradition, there's the sense of, grace and repentance, that you basically repent of your sins and under God's grace, you're always forgiven. And it kind of takes to me, and it's also that kind of personal salvation piece, it's like everybody talks about, it's, their personal salvation. It takes a bit of that responsibility and that sense of accountability away from people. And I think that can be a big issue for our society is that we don't really teach ourselves or teach our children that you're responsible for what you do. Yes, you're forgiven. We all make mistakes,
right?
But the reality is you made a choice, and the choice is there for you to make. Ideally, you're making the better choice. If you make the wrong choice, you need to learn from it. It's not just okay. That's okay. You're forgiven.
Right.
It's wiped clean.
Right. It's not swish, swish, get out of jail free card. It's not that. It is the recognition that we have the capacity to make choices and we can make the better choice. And if we don't, okay, everybody makes mistakes, but there are still consequences for those choices. Like the swish, swish is the bigger forgiveness, the bigger grace, the bigger, it's okay, you're human, you're going to screw it up. But you still have to deal with the consequences of what you did. I'm sorry, can't erase that. So again, there's a distinction that's made in my tradition where there is the sin that you've sinned against God. God can say, it's okay, you're human, I get it. But if you did something to somebody else, only they can give you the forgiveness, right? So there's that distinction that you still have to suffer the consequences and they're free to not give you the forgiveness,
Yeah.
That's the real clincher right there, And
when it comes to forgiveness, how important is it that we forgive others?
Well, I think we have to define what forgiveness means. So forgiveness doesn't change the past. It changes the future, right? So you don't, somebody did what they did by forgiving them. You're not necessarily saying it's okay, you can keep doing it. It's what you're doing is saying, I'm not going to continue to hold that against you. Or, so it changes the future, not the past. And I think, you can forgive people for making the wrong choices. You can forgive people. I mean, there's all kinds of extenuating circumstances. If you could put yourself in their shoes under the exact same circumstances, it's very possible that you might do the same thing. So there's also that recognition of like, I'm capable of screwing up too. So there's compassion involved in that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they get the pass. There's still consequence. I
I've
think
heard a lot of people. Oh, go ahead.
well, I just think also, the other challenge here is forgiving ourselves.
Mm.
And oftentimes we're harder on ourselves than we are on other people. We let other people slide, and then we just, beat ourselves up endlessly.
And I've heard, some say, that really forgiveness is for ourselves. It's not really for the other person. It's letting go of that burden that we're carrying so that we can be freer.
Yeah.
And we attended, when we lived in Michigan, we attended Rob Bell's church. I don't know if you're familiar with Rob Bell. Mm-hmm. Many Christians listening to might, label him a heretic. Some think he's great. I happen to think, his wisdom is spot on. He's a good bridge between the more mythical traditions, the Jewish traditions, and a more contemporary viewpoint of, what the Bible language is for us today. Mm-hmm. But he did a whole series of these videos called Numas. Mm-hmm. And there's one called, I think it's called Luggage. And it's basically, it's all about just the burden of carrying that lack of forgiveness with you. And this woman's at, I believe it's filmed at the Grand Rapids airport because we've been there so many times. But she's just, in the airport, and she's, just carrying her luggage through, and he's talking in the background about forgiveness and carrying all that burden around. And I'm going to give away, a very dramatic ending. So my apologies to anybody. And it's,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert here for sure. But she walks out into the parking lot, with her baggage and she's crossing the street and gets boom hit by a car. And it just is all of a sudden it's something you don't expect at all. But it's just that realization that you're carrying this stuff around and why, and it can all be over in a moment. And just let it go.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of pronounce it wrong. I think you've corrected my pronunciation, but Haval, that idea of from the book of Ecclesiastics, that it's all mist. There's different ways that it's translated, but I tend to try and carry that word with me. And I carry a mist bottle in my car that when people are just really annoying me, I try to make it a habit of just, Haval, just let it go. Just, it's all mist. It's nothing. Just let it go and just spray the bottle.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good practice. Is like, don't sweat the small stuff. And again, that's a choice, right? We can choose whether we want to be burdened or, worked up over all of this or not. And there's a difference. You get it's all good, that thing, it's all good. It's like, no, that's bypass. Like that's not making an actual choice, because sometimes it may not be all good, but the choice is, are you going to let it derail you? Are you going to let it bother you? Are you, if somebody has done something, are you going to carry that around and just be angry and mad? It's just, that anger, I forget exactly what the saying is, but it's basically like you're just poisoning yourself. Right? That's what you're doing. You're making your life miserable. And again, going back to my tradition, this teshuvah, this turning, this ability to make the choice to turn, it doesn't change what happens. It changes you. It changes how you perceive and experience what happened. And that's the only thing you can control.
And that's why I use the language carpe momento, that just seize the moment, because, where we are in this moment is the next choice that we have.
Every time. It's choice after choice after choice after choice.
And the past just brought us to where that decision is. And, however good or bad it was, it's given us the skill base, the experience to make this next, good, hopefully good decision.
Right. And we're not going to change the past. You don't erase it. Done.
No.
It's done. You can't change it. There's some New Age traditions and even actually in mystical traditions that would say that when you make this kind of full teshuvah, when actions that you would have taken previously for evil, right, are actually then taken for good, that you can change the past. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't, I
don't believe you could change the past.
I have no proof of this, but I know you change the future.
And that kind of leads to a question I've been asked. And I think we've maybe talked about this in a previous conversation. Talk about in the future.
I like in a future conversation. There's
Wow,
no time
psychic.
either.
We're gonna talk about it now, so it's a future conversation. But when people have asked, if you could go back in time and change one thing, what would you change? And to me, it's always been never, because what's the point? If I go back and change, I run the risk of changing the trajectory of so many different lives and circumstances that I'm changing the present in ways that should not be changed. It's more important, what do I do next?
Right.
Not what did I do in the past? If I mistreated somebody, I can treat them better right now. I can't change what I did in the past. If I go back and change it, they might not be the person that they are because they lost the opportunity to gain strength, to gain self-confidence, whatever it might be.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's like, what is it? Back to the Future.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like, you can't mess with what happened in the past because you changed the whole trajectory. And again, there's so many influences. There's so many factors, who knows what all of the factors that have gone into this actual very moment, you and I sitting and having this conversation.
And I think it's all part of our spiritual evolution. If we don't have this friction in the past, or the tension, or, if Adam and Eve hadn't touched the apple, who knows where we'd be right now?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like, if they hadn't separated themselves, and that's what that choice was, they made the choice to separate themselves from the sacred. They were in the Garden of Eden. Everything was hunky dory. They had everything they needed, right? They made a choice, and that choice propelled humanity, right? Like, that's like, think about it. Otherwise we just be hanging out in the Garden of Eden. And for some people that sounds great. And, wouldn't it be great to get back there? But that is coming back to unity with source is what that is, And right. So the whole rest of the Bible, at least the Hebrew Bible, is all about human beings learning to deal with the consequences of their choices. That is literally what it is, all the way through till the very end. Like, here's the choice you made, here are the consequences. Here's what happened, here's how you dealt with it. It's all about learning to take responsibility for our choices and making better choices.
And then you have a lot of people that will look at that and say, well, how can God be good if he would allow all this evil to happen in the world?
Now we're getting into a whole other conversation, and it's a struggle that a lot of people have. Who said God is good? Who said God is only good, right? God destroys stuff, man. He's got a temper. He's like, sorry. Oh, sorry. I just wiped out the entire world. All right. I won't do it again. I promise. Here's the rainbow. I won't do it again. Right.
Right.
But the reality is that it's all God, right? There is nothing that isn't God.
And that's where I think, people miss the mark when, how are you defining good? What is good is in your viewpoint. Is good is nothing happens evil to me.
Correct.
Nothing is bad.
Right.
Like you said, sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
Everything is hunky dory. We're in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And the reality is all good, so the scripture, all things work together for good who believe, in God. I forget the exact scripture there.
Yeah.
But, when you say all things work together for good, you got to accept that then the troubles in our lives are to have a good outcome. And it might not be a good outcome for us, right, but it's ultimately a good outcome for humanity. And it's all part of that spiritual evolution. And
we don't know all the factors that went into creating this moment. So who are we to say that what's happening right now is not, good? It might be good in the long run. May not be good for us. Like the idea that all humans could disappear. Oh, that would be a tragedy. I don't know. I think the trees and the bears would be really happy.
True.
Like who's to say what is good? And again, if you consider that God is all of it, there's nothing that isn't God, right? Then, God might at this very moment be going, you know what? I really think the goldenrod needs a little more attention. So we're going to do some things that may not be so good for the, predators of goldenrod. Not that there are, I don't know. I'm just looking at my field and it's covered in goldenrod right now. But,
where did goldenrod come from?
It's just right out there. My field is covered in yellow goldenrod, and I have this thing of like, okay, it's taking over everything. It just is taking over the field because that's what goldenrod does, because it produces like 80 million seeds, on each flower. But, God might be saying, goldenrod really needs a little support here. So I'm going to make that happen, and it might be not good for me, but oh well.
Yeah. Well, and even for those who, spiritual is not God and are not religion and those types of things, you can look at it the same way. I mean, you just look at, recall, relatively recently, they put wolves back into, I think was it Yosemite or Yellowstone or one of those.
Yeah.
And people were all up in arms and worried about it. And yet it actually corrected so much of the ecology in that area because, you need certain predators and you need, certain, people that are, animals that are the food for these predators.
Right.
And you need fires in the wilderness in order to burn so that new growth can happen.
Right.
So a lot of what we think is bad is really just part of the
This
growth process.
balancing. It's this
Yeah.
balancing and these cycles, right? And we go through cycles of abundance and we go through cycles where things, die back. And absolutely, it's, you don't have to call it whatever you want. We can call it the universe. We can call it the order, the order of the universe. You don't have to call it God. You don't have to call it
Right.
anything, right? But there is a natural rhythm and cycle, and once you mess with one part of it, something else is going to have to, to create that harmony, that balance, and balance doesn't mean it's all equal. Balance is, it's like being on a balance board, right? You're always doing these
Right.
micro adjustments to create the harmony, but it's like it's maybe like that for a minute, like we're coming up on fall equinox, right? We have one day where we are, and it's not even the whole day where the day and night are equal. It's
Yeah.
just always in this motion, always. So, and again, it comes back to our choices, right? Because there's so many factors involved, because we don't have the God's eye view. We're not looking at the whole picture all the time. We don't, we can make the choices that we make based on the information that we have to try to do the better thing. But, that may fail. Sometimes we think we're doing the right thing and it just falls apart by our standards.
Right. But then you talk to somebody down the line, it's like, if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't have happened. So.
Right. Yeah. So our choices matter. Our choices matter immensely, and our ability to take responsibility for our choices and to take that. And if we need to turn, to turn towards what we know. I mean, I think we actually know deep inside, if we listen to that, what the right choice is. Sometimes we may just not know, we may just be like, I'm ignorant here about this. I don't know. I think on the deepest level, we do.
And when we don't, making that wrong decision or making the right decision, whether it's kind of haphazard, you just happen to get lucky or unlucky in
You
that
stumbled into
situation.
it, right?
Right. You're gonna learn from it. Now you know what is the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
If we learn from history. And that's why I think we have a lot of these cycles in history, is because we don't necessarily learn.
I don't know who it was who said it, but the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history.
True.
No, we do, but we will always repeat. But it's not going around the circle the same way all the time. It's more like a spiral, up or down or whatever. You're never, you end up back in the same place, sort of, but you can't step in the same river twice, right? So you're not in the same place. You're in the same place. It looks like the same place, but you've got all the experience and all the information and everything that's happened since the last time you were in this place.
Just made me think of Groundhog Day, the movie. He's in the same cycle, but he's learning and changing things every step of the way, every day that it happens.
He changes one little thing, right? He's like, okay, now I know I got this far. Now I need to change the next thing. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's just our spiritual journey all the way around, right? All the way. And again, going back to, the Hebrew Bible, where the whole story is about that, is learning to make choices. That is the spiritual journey.
And I think you've mentioned in the past that this whole idea of, why did God put the tree in the Garden of Eden if he didn't want them to touch it or didn't know that they would touch it?
He knew, of course. Yeah, I gave you free choice. And I told you don't touch it just because I knew you would. Because, and then there's, like the first commandment that God gives is don't touch the tree. He said, don't do something. And we failed that, like right off the bat, right?
Right.
So then he tries it again with Noah, right? And he tells Noah, go build an ark. Noah doesn't question. Noah just builds it, you know? So it's like, all right, so here's, you know, he did that, but he didn't actually just make a choice. You know, so like it's literally you can if you go through the Bible and you look at it this way, you will see that each time there's a choice. And then he goes to Abraham and he tells Abraham, you need to leave. Lech lecha, you've got to go. Abraham doesn't question it. He goes, you know. But Abraham is the first character in the Bible that argues back occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah.
Yeah. Makes a choice. Says, wait a minute, why am I doing this?
And people look at some of the choices like, wait a minute, God tells you to kill your son and you don't question it.
Right, which was a problem, right? The Akedah is a problem. It's like that, you know, wait, and God said, all right, this is a problem. I'm going to stop you because now it's blind faith. You're not questioning, you're not thinking, you're not making choices. It's just blind faith.
I've never had it pointed out that way. That is kind of brilliant. I like that, you know, we can't go on blind faith. It's okay to question God. But
Exactly.
God expects us to question him.
He put the tree there on purpose and told them don't touch it. And he put it there, you know, and not told them. But yeah, it's okay. And that is, you know, that's the evolution in the Hebrew Bible is that questioning, you know, and that ability to make choices and suffer the consequences. And what's interesting, like those early ones are don't touch it, do this. Those are easy, right? It gets so much more complicated as the story goes on about the kinds of choices. There's so much more subtlety and nuance. You know, why do they have to wander around for 40 years? Because the spies made the choice to be afraid and then get everybody else afraid. And God says, now you got to wander for 40 years, you know? And because Moses didn't stop them, Moses doesn't get to go into so they get the choices that we have to make get more complex.
Which brings us to 2025.
Yeah, we have a lot of very complicated choices to make right now.
Right.
And we're being, you know, particularly pushed to make choices along certain ideological lines. In some cases, religious lines that may amount more to, you know, blind faith and not actual exploration, not turning in and going, is this in alignment with, you know, what would be the better choice here?
And sometimes that blind faith isn't faith in what we perceive to be our God either. It's like, we're shaping our God, and I think anybody can kind of use that. It could be a big G, small G God. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever we are putting it on the altar of worship, we decide that what that is going to be shaped like, and so we shape our decisions based on what we really want rather than what should be.
False idols, right? That's the ban against shaping it. You can't shape it. We don't have the right to shape it. So when we say, you know, this is our God, put that false idol up there on the pedestal, that's the ban against false idols.
Right.
You know, that's not that's a choice from our egos. It's a choice from whatever, you know, somebody else's ego, and we're believing them. It's and I think, you know, particularly right now, like we are at a boiling point over, you know, right, you know, one side taking what's, you know, claiming to be right, the other side claiming to be right, one side creating, you know, this culture of fear. And I mean, both sides really, like we're in this cauldron, and it is hard. It's hard to make that choice. It's hard to make a choice right now because you're getting so much bombardment. And if you're not real solid in your own belief system and your own inner ethics, you know, then it's going to be really easy to get swayed. Really,
it brings me back to kind of that thought of the third way that some will, you know, preach about. That, you know, we tend to think there's only two decisions, And so how many people voted in the most recent elections? And I'll say, going back, I don't know how many different elections I've had people say to me, well, if you vote for so-and-so, you're voting for this person.
Right.
And that third choice is never quite the way. But, when we look at our options, there is always a third way, maybe fourth or fifth too, but there's always other options. And I think back of when Christ in the Sermon on the Mount talks about, some of the things like turning the other cheek, and he's not giving us a decision to either, fight back or be abused.
Lay
He's
down,
giving us an option to change the circumstances.
to turn, right?
To turn, yeah.
Turn, that word, and that he used that intentionally. Remember, he was he was a well-educated Jew. Like he used that word intentionally, to turn, right? And there's always more than the binary, the false binary that we are being, it's being shoved down our throats right now, is that there's this or this, that. That's a false binary, right?
Yeah, I love, I think it was Rob Bell that kind of taught me that, when you hear the story about carrying when a Roman soldier compels you to carry their pack a mile and you go the extra mile, that isn't a sign of weakness. That is such a sign of strength, because the Roman soldiers can only compel you to walk a mile. And so if you went that extra mile, now you're putting them in that situation where they're like, wait, no, you got to stop. Don't do this. And, no, I'm fine. I'll carry this for you. I have 3 miles. I'm fine. Let's do it. And so you're really, again, turning it on them as opposed to, resisting it, and causing problems by just saying, I won't do it. Or, out of weakness, I'm going to carry this. You're doing it because you have control. You have the power to say yes or no. And I'm going to say yes here, but I'm saying yes because I'm going to embarrass the hell out of you because I'm going to carry it the extra mile.
It's like, using it's the Aikido, when somebody comes at you with force, you use their force, right? But again, it's about making a conscious choice.
Right.
And the choice to do nothing is still a choice.
Right.
But if it's not a choice that's made consciously, it's a choice made out of fear or made out of, usually fear, it's not, if it's not a choice that you're making consciously, then it's, you're not really exercising the free will that you've been given.
Right. So it's not right and left. There's correct, right? Or better decision.
There's making a conscious choice and taking responsibility for that choice, whatever it is, because you can't say, well, the devil made me do it all the time, like that's just, you've given up your authority. You've given up your autonomy, your sovereignty. Like that's not what was intended here.
Yeah, I bore my students with the phrase opportunity costs all the time, because it's like, and that's coming from an exercise physiology perspective. If somebody says, well, I don't have time to exercise. Well, you have 24 hours. Don't tell me you don't have time. What are you doing with that time? Now, there may be things that are more important than exercise in the moment that you don't exercise, but there's probably a lot of things you're doing that are less important. And so it's always, if I do something, it's preventing me from doing something else. And if I should do something and I don't do that, then that's a bad thing. If I, do the opposite, then, it may be good, maybe bad.
Right. But it's always, we only do the things we want to do. I mean, even if it's choosing to do something that we don't want to do, we do it because we actually have in our minds some benefit for doing it, like,
right.
I don't really want to clean up my cat's vomit, like I don't really like doing that. My cat's sick, so he's like throwing up dead animals all over the house. Really don't want to do that, but if there's a benefit in doing it, which is that I'm not going to, step in chipmunk guts on the way, but I mean, that's a really sort of blithe analogy, but we only do the things that we want to do. So then it comes down to what is our intention in our choices. So again, this is where, the simple, I do this, I don't do this, gets more complicated. Is what is my intention in making this choice? That gets even more. It's like, wow, okay, turn that microscope up a little bit so I can really look at why am I making.
Yeah, there's so many different pathways I want to go down that, but I don't want to go any political pathways or, bring up some topics that could definitely offend people. But there are, when we talk politically about choice, people will say, I'm going to have to bring it up because, the whole kind of abortion argument,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm pro-choice, I am, if you're pro-choice, you're anti-abortion. If you're pro-abortion, you're anti-choice. But in
Like
reality,
pro anti.
yeah, you can't, it offends people. Like if I'll say that I am anti-abortion, but I'm pro-choice, because the choice is not up to me. It's between them and their God.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do certain choices and again, I'm not bringing it down the abortion track because I don't want to go down that this way, but there are different choices. We're in favor of certain things. Every time we vote, we're in favor of one thing versus the other. Sometimes we're in favor of neither, but we have to take a side because those are the only two choices. But we're always in situations where there's a choice. And being pro-choice just means that we are open to people making the decision based on the facts that they have, what works for them, what's important for them. But ultimately, that decision is on them. It's their responsibility. And I don't know if I'm going down the wrong pathway here, but
No, it's always still. I mean, we make our own choices. And one of the things that we have to consider, first of all, politically, we're given false binaries. We're given pro anti, right? They're just false binaries. You got to think beyond those. But there's also the idea. So my teacher, my Taoist teacher, who was an amazing, amazing man, always said, you're every moment you are one choice away from completely changing your life. Think about that.
That's my carpe memento.
Right, it is, but with a little bit more drama.
Right, a lot more drama.
Like the choice that you make in this moment could utterly change your life, and that's that. If you take that seriously, that's like that could be like, am I making the right choice? I'm not. Well, you get the next moment. You can make another choice the next moment. Yeah, I mean,
that is the reality. That we have in our next decision a decision that can alter the universe.
Absolutely, choose well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I tell people. Like, it's not about choosing the right choice or the wrong choice. It's choose well, choose wisely. Choose with as much wisdom as you possibly can, and that might mean you can't make that choice immediately. You have to actually think of it.
So I was going to ask you this question a little bit later. This seems like a really good time to ask it. And it's a question I'm going to start bringing up to guests on this podcast. It was presented to me several episodes ago by Stephen Puri. So I'm calling it the Puri question, which he asked me, if you were handed a magic wand that you could use to change anything in the universe, but you could only use it once, how would you use it?
Oh, wow. I have to think about that.
No, it's a hard one. He kept pressuring me. He's like, come on, you're stalling.
Oh, man. I mean, just in keeping with the sort of theme of our conversation, it would be if my magic wand could help people choose with more wisdom, with more consideration for the consequences of their choices. I think that might take care of a lot of the other stuff. That might take care of a lot of the other problems that we're experiencing. I think today, right now, this moment, that would be my choice.
Stephen's response was he'd give everybody more empathy. My response, and I've asked it to a couple other friends, and they had the same response. It's like, I would destroy it. If I was given that magic wand, I would break it, bury it, hide it from anybody so that nobody had access to it, because that's just way too much power for any one person to have.
Right. And that's the bigger answer for sure, and it ties into that idea of like, who are we to say what somebody else's choice should be?
Right.
So mine's somewhere between destroying the wand and the other things is like giving people the capacity to make better choices.
Right. But in a sense, don't we already have that?
Of
It's
course we
just a
do.
matter of education. So using that one, and it's the same with empathy. And that's how I felt with his answer. It was like, yeah, okay, yeah, we can give people a little bit more empathy, but now we're all on the same plane of empathy. Have we improved the situation anymore?
Yeah, and I'm all for empathy, but I also feel like empathy becomes oftentimes it becomes this kind of bypass, right? And there's empathy without discernment. Everybody gets empathy. There's no discernment about like, I get it. I understand why you did it. So again, going back to my tradition, there's judgment and mercy.
Right.
And when you have everybody's just empathizing all the time, there's all mercy.
Yeah.
There's no judgment, and it doesn't work that way. We have to have both. And I think in this culture, especially right now, because empathy has been weaponized, one side saying empathy is a weakness, the other side saying you have no empathy, like empathy has become a weapon, and it also has become an excuse.
Right.
And I think we're kind of going down the wrong path on both of those.
And I think with the wand thing as well, is I thought about it further after my conversation with Steve. I started thinking, well, we actually have access to that wand every moment of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
The decision that I make right now is having that wand.
Mm-hmm.
I can change anything. I mean, I can't change globally, everything, but I can make an impact on the future of the universe because I make this decision.
Correct.
I'm afraid that if I make the wrong decision, it could have devastating consequences,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's choose wisely, like
Exactly.
you said.
Choose wisely, I mean, I love the question because it brings all this stuff up. It's a good question. But yeah, I mean, we have this capacity in every single moment. We can touch the tree or not.
Right.
And what is going to help us make wiser decisions? It could be more empathy sometimes. It could be more judgment sometimes,
Right.
It could be, and I don't mean judgment as in this, I mean being able to judge the
Right.
value of something, discernment. It could be any number of things that's going to help us, turning ourselves more towards whatever it is we consider to be the sacred, and let that guide you.
Yeah.
Right? Let that guide you.
Yeah. I think if that magic wand was used to say, okay, well, we're going to go back and Eve isn't going to eat the apple.
Boring.
I know. What is that? Where is that going to put mankind from that decision? And so, and it was the same. I thought, and I brought this up to Steve. It's like if I said, okay, well, I'm going to eradicate racism, which is a noble thing to do, and I would love for it to be completely eradicated. But my making that decision, waving that wand, what if there's somebody out there right now who, because of their experience with racism, changes the world? And if you take away that racism, they're not going to make the decisions and the changes that are going to better mankind.
And again, we might not like everything that's happening, but if it's all part of the plan, it's all part of this process, who are we to say what stays and what goes?
Right.
That takes a lot of hubris, a lot of arrogance, well, in my opinion, it's that I think is one of the things that we have to work on, that in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
I know the way things are supposed to go. I mean, that's just us as humans trying to tell God how to do God's job. But it's also even on the smaller scale, down to the Facebook fight level, like your opinion matters that much. It was really interesting years ago when I was in Dharamsala in India, which is where the Dalai Lama, and the whole Tibetan community had set up shop in India in exile. And I was teaching English to Tibetan monks. And I was working with this one really wonderful young monk, and he wanted to be a teacher. He wanted to go to the West and teach Buddhism. I'm like, great, teach me, I'll correct your English. So this is decades ago. And one of the things that blew my mind was when he said, we were talking about attachments. And he said, your opinion is an attachment. I was like, oh, right. Being a very opinionated person myself, I'm like, I'm definitely opinionated, but that realization that, wow, when I'm attached to my opinion, then I'm going to make choices that are not good, not wise, because my opinion's running this. Yeah, that goes down a whole other rabbit hole about,
Yeah.
what are we attached to? But that affects our opinions. If we're attached to not forgiving somebody, right? Dragging that luggage till we get hit by the bus in the parking lot, we have to look at what colors our choices.
One of those profound moments that I have in this podcast. So thinking where to go from there. And maybe that's kind of where we can kind of end it as we wrap up this hour. Any further thoughts or comments on what we've talked about? Kind of final words to empower the people who are listening or watching this podcast?
Whenever possible, do your best to choose well. It matters. Every choice you make, it really does. There are no, maybe what you eat for dinner is not a major choice, but it could be. It could be a major choice. So, and remember that each choice can change your life.
And we'll just end there, and I'll just say carpe memento. Seize the day and make the right choice.